Welcome to From Combat Boots to Business Suits, the podcast brought to you by the Officers Association Scotland. I'm your host, Jane Burns, and today my guest is the wonderful Chief Executive of Scottish Lands and Estates, Sarah-Jane Laing. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
Do you mind if I call you SJ?
Not at all.
Okay, we'll go for it. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's a real pleasure. This whole series is called The Employer Edit, and it's all about advocacy for hiring, why hiring military is good for business. And you definitely have a lot to say on that subject. So it's a pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Before we get into it, I would like actually to just learn a little bit more about you, about your career, what's brought you to this point, and just your story so far.
Goodness, where do I start? So I've been Chief Executive of Scottish Land and Estates for nearly 7 years, 6.5 years. Took over just before COVID. What a time to become Chief Executive. But I've been with the organisation for a number of years, nearly 22. So joined from local authority. So my background is rural policy, strategy, policy development. I suppose I was always kind of driven to that kind of the policy world. Had no idea that an organisation like this existed, if I'm honest, representing landowners, rural businesses, the people who are out there kind of working the land, creating opportunities, delivering for people, jobs and nature. So I had always thought I was going to be a lawyer. So that was my planned route from about 13, and then went to Edinburgh University, got my place to do law, went to Freshers Week and decided that it all looked like really hard work. So during Freshers Week, I changed to philosophy and psychology, and had a wonderful 4 years. If you ask my dad, I spent 4 years learning how to argue better than I already could.
Wow.
Yep. He said that was basically what I learned to do. But during that, fell into the kind of the world of public policy, as I say. Yep. I had a summer job with Scottish Borders Council, which at that point actually was an old district council, back in the district council days. And I was supporting the housing and planning guys, looking at something called care in the community.
Okay, yeah.
Which was where, at that point there's a big drive for people being provided with support in the community. So I worked in that kind of field during my summer holidays, and I'll be honest, I just really fell in love with public policy, which sounds a bit geeky, but I suppose I am a bit of a geek.
It does sound a wee bit geeky, I'm not going to lie to you.
But you realise that there are people whose jobs are there to kind of create opportunity and to really get involved in supporting people at some pretty critical times. So I ran the homeless service for a while in the Borders, providing lots of support to young people leaving care, but family breakdown. So you had the kind of the crisis side of things, but then you also had the kind of longer term. How do you create communities? How do you ensure that there's enough homes for people to live in? So there are people whose jobs that is, and I had no idea that these jobs existed. I think I'd probably just taken it for granted. I grew up in a council house in Kelso. I'd never really thought about how that housing had kind of come to fruition.
Yes.
When in reality, it had actually been a partnership between the local estates, in terms of Roxburgh and Lothian Estates, and the council to free up land that had been previously used for farming, to create hundreds of new social houses, which really for my generation in Kelso was then kind of on the back of Mrs. Thatcher's policy, which created opportunity for us, regardless of people's politics.
Yes.
You had a generation who were then children of first-time buyers. Yeah. Who had capital, who had aspirations. So that was all as a result of social policy. So that's kind of how I fell into it. Came here as a result of a conversation with someone who was working for the organisation at the time, who came to a meeting that I held in Scottish Borders Council, which was trying to create a bridge between local authority and private landlords. So again, I think I'm always kind of drawn to roles that have a kind of strong convening aspect to it, bringing people together to deliver a shared vision. So that's something that really drives me. What's our kind of long-term shared vision? Is where's our common ground? How do we work together? And I just happened to sort of say, look, you guys sound great. If there's ever a job going, give me a shout. Because you have to kind of take your shots.
Of course
at
you do.
And he said, you're not going to believe this, but we've just received government funding for a housing strategy officer. Are you interested? And that was 22 years ago. And
Wow.
I've never left.
That's amazing. See, to be honest, the way that you talk about that, for all we're joking, it sounds really geeky. You speak so passionately, and you actually do it. When you explain it, it sounds extremely interesting, and also it is kind of a little bit of a fault of many of us in society, myself included, is that it does feel like things just happen and we merely just complain about them, rather than the work and the convening that you spoke about to actually get something over the line.
Absolutely, and the work that goes behind the scenes to kind of bring together something like a youth housing strategy for the whole of the Borders region. But that impacts not just the people who are young now, but the next generation.
Yes.
So if you are creating opportunity for young people leaving care to have a settled home life, to have support, to be able to take on their own tenancies, you're creating a brighter future for them. And and as I say, there's lots of people performing those jobs day in, day out, that are pretty unsung heroes, I think, in terms of the success of Scotland.
That's a beautiful thing to say. Really, that fantastic. So you've moved into Scottish Land and Estates then, and what are the parallels then? Because obviously you came in as a social housing officer, you've worked your way up now that you're chief exec. But in terms of the goals and the visions and the aspirations of Scottish Land and Estates, what are the parallels between that and what you were doing before, this convening role, this making things happen for the good of Scotland?
It's a really good question, because as a membership organisation, we're not a trade union. Yep. So we're not just here to make sure that our members are better off than they were yesterday. The purpose and vision of this organisation has been, since it was started in 1906, is about a successful rural Scotland that delivers benefits for all. Mm-hmm. So it's about delivering for people, jobs and nature. So what we do, yes, we provide lots and lots of support to our members directly through training, through advising them on the latest regulatory changes. We inspire, so we make sure they kind of know what is possible.
Yes.
We do a series of things called walk and talk events where we get people out to see, how problems have been solved or see the latest technology and thinking. But we also, the other part of our work, which is linked back to my previous roles, is the influence that we have.
Yes.
So we influence public policy, in Holyrood, Westminster, previously in Brussels, and at local authorities. So we're there trying to make sure that we're creating a climate in which rural businesses can thrive, which in turn then create opportunities for others, whether that's in terms of nature restoration, whether it's community facilities like housing, or whether it's creating opportunities for micro businesses and others to operate from our members' land. And Scottish Land and Estates reach is pretty significant. I think we estimate that our members probably own and manage around almost 60% of Scotland's rural land.
Wow, yeah.
Something like 70% of Scotland's renewable energy is generated from our members' land. Uh-huh. They provide homes for tens of thousands of families. Provide opportunities for businesses to operate from land and premises. And when it comes to things like peatland restoration or natural forest regeneration, our members are at the forefront of that. So it's really, really varied as well. And I'm someone who does get quite easily bored. And I think in a job like this, you never know what might pop up, and it's so diverse. One day we can be talking about deer management, the next we're talking about non-domestic rates, and next we're helping develop a grant scheme for new homes. So it's so varied.
Yes.
And I think that's what kind of keeps the passion alive for me, but also provides lots and lots of opportunities for us to work in spaces where we can convene or be part of discussions on so many different areas, bringing people together in so many different areas, and we can bring in, our knowledge on how we made things work in other sectors or other areas into conversation. So something that maybe worked in a housing sphere might be then replicated when we're talking about infrastructure or energy. So being able to kind of work across that and not be a single issue pressure group is something, as I say, that really drives me.
I can see that you wouldn't have stuck with Scottish Land and Estates for 22 years if it wasn't ever changing, ever evolving. And clearly, I mean, do you think you'll be here for another 10, 15 years? What are you thinking?
My goodness, that's a big question. Do you know, though, I think any successful CEO, any successful leader also has to nurture talent and succession. I know I'm a product of that, having developed within this organisation. I have so many stars within this team that what I want to kind of make sure as well is that I don't then act as a barrier to the next CEO.
Yeah.
So, we're developing people within the organisation's developing. I think, I certainly am very committed to the work that Scottish Land and Estates does. But I think there's opportunities for us to operate in other areas. And I think the platform that SLE gives to me, I am starting to kind of think about how else do I take advantage of that.
Sure.
I've been involved in a number of government task forces, sit in a number of kind of groups, and you kind of think, is there a kind of SLE voice you can kind of take into that kind of different stage?
Yeah. So obviously you are a big friend to the Officers Association Scotland, and we're here today to talk about advocacy for why organisations, businesses, government bodies, anyone should hire ex-military talent. So what was the first interaction that you started to have with the ex-military community, and what made you start to see the value that they could bring to civilian life and to organisations in general?
So there's always been a really strong link between our membership and the military. And I think when I first joined the organisation 22 years ago, there'd be a number of people in office bearer roles in the board, the regional committees, who'd come from that background. The membership cohort, people who own and manage land in Scotland, have got a really, really strong affinity and strong background with the military. So it was through the members. That's when the first, and a number of people who had very successful careers, military careers, who then were having very successful careers in land management.
Yeah.
And who'd come back to manage family estates and were bringing a wealth of experience and skills with them. And I'd had one of my probably the closest or the next step was when one of my chairmen came into the role, and he brought everything from both his business and his military career.
Yes.
And my goodness, it was really interesting just to see the value of that combination of skills.
Yes.
So the business skills, along with the military background, and it really changed the way that we did things. So that was probably that was the first time I really saw the kind of the value of that kind of combination. But that it's really deep rooted in this organisation, the relationship with the military.
So let's look at it both ways, because we at the Officers Association Scotland, we have hosted the rural sector insight nights. They're always very, very popular with our members, although statistically not as many of them as show interest actually move into the rural sector and into that line of work. But there seems to be something kind of deep rooted almost in the soul of the service leaver, the thought of managing an estate or doing a job that gets them outside. They're working with nature. They're not cooped up in an office, if you like. So let's look at it from a veteran's point of view. What would you say to any service leaver that would be considering a career in the rural sector? What would be your advice to them?
It's a really great question, because I think the ones that I've been talking about had already had a connection with rural, so it was really easy for them to come back into the sector. I think for those people who may not have any experience or knowledge, it might seem as though the opportunities are quite limited. And my goodness, that it can be further from the truth. And I think that's one thing I'd sort of say to any veterans: there will be a role in the rural sector that suits you, because, as I say, it's so varied. It provides so many opportunities to look at things in different ways, whether that's getting involved in a kind of more nature-based approach.
Yep.
So we've got a number of veterans who've gone into kind of project management in terms of nature restoration, got really involved in really driving Scotland's journey towards net zero, and that comes with what's needed for that: a really strong project management delivery skills.
Yep.
And that kind of passion. But then you've also got, management of tens of thousands of properties. You've got people who are rebuilding Scotland's roads and bridges.
Yes.
So I think for me, it's a variety. There will be a job in the rural sector that suits you if you have a passion for Scotland.
Yeah. And if we flip it on its head then, and we talk to businesses, organisations, and I'm not talking about even just organisations in the rural sector, anyone that has a candidate coming through the door or a CV land on their lap, and it is someone who is, well, let's take it from a service leaver point of view, so someone who's just leaving the military, who doesn't have any experience of a civilian organisation, if you like. What would you say to them? What are the benefits that service leaver could bring to any organisation? What, in terms of the skills, the experience that they bring, what value do you see in a candidate like that?
A really long list. I mean, and I'm speaking from personal experience here of both those people I've seen within the membership, but those that we have employed directly. I think probably top of my list would be adaptability. The sector's a fast-moving sector, and new opportunities, new challenges. Sometimes you see them coming, sometimes you don't. And what we've seen is a real adaptability within the veteran cohort. Resilience. Again, thinking back to a sector that is really fast-paced at times, especially if you're involved in the kind of more policy world. There's been, the pace and scale of change can be quite overwhelming, and I see a really strong sense of resilience. Yeah. The thing back to what I talked about at the beginning about public policy, the delivering for the public good. Yeah. Is something that is just ingrained in veterans, and I think I see that then applied in meeting situations, in how they go about doing their job, that they're always kind of thinking, okay, this is my role, but how is this contributing to society? Yes. How is this making a difference? And for some people, coming from different spheres, that's quite different. Quite difficult, sorry, because they'll be quite focused on their area of expertise. And that's where they kind of go down that rabbit hole of kind of like, that's going to give the best outcome for trees that I can kind of think of. And nothing else matters apart from those trees. And that's great. But what I see in veterans is, they'll have that clear vision, but they'll also be kind of thinking, what will be the impact on other things? Yes. And how can I find that sweet spot of delivering a really good outcome for this, while also thinking about how does this impact in other areas? Yeah. And I've seen that in I would say every veteran that I've come in contact with. So it's clearly something that's ingrained in the development of them during their time in the service. Yep. And I was thinking of all the different sort of clients that we deal with, and obviously people leave the military at so many different stages, life stages. Some of them will have done a full career. They're looking for something a little bit different to someone who maybe has a young family and all of that sort of thing. So that you'd mentioned how there was a great combination between the veterans who had business or a civilian work experience combined with their military skills. What sort of roles would maybe someone who's a little bit further on in their career, what sort of avenues would be available to them in the rural sector? So we've seen people who've ended or come to the end of a really senior role go into manage estates. So, chief executives of a kind of multifaceted rural business, where you have a large number of employees, but you've also got a number of different strands. So you have a command role. Yeah. So you're looking at long-term strategic kind of planning, but you're also probably directing day-to-day operational delivery. And I've seen some really successful veterans kind of go in and deliver really well in those roles. So, you're talking about very senior leadership with significant businesses within Scotland. And again, I think people kind of think that maybe some of the rural jobs are at that kind of, lower or kind of middling level. Quite, yeah. But you're not. You're talking about significant six-figure plus roles. And the other side of things is in terms of some of the professional organisations. So you will have professional advisors who have got expertise, strong expertise and technical expertise, but they're looking for direction. Yes. So, going in at a kind of senior partner level to kind of direct delivery of really quite significant projects, massive infrastructure projects. Our members are building the only 2 new towns in Scotland, so the level that they're working on is much, much higher, much broader than people anticipate. And so if you're someone who has been at the top of your career, you can come in at the top level.
Yes.
In rural Scotland as well.
And one of the questions I think that anyone listening today will be kind of burning is, do you have to live in a rural area to work in the rural sector?
It's a really good question. I don't think you have to live in it. I do think you have to have a slight affinity and slight understanding, because there can be specific challenges of rural.
Yes.
So if you don't have a little bit of understanding of that, it can make your job more difficult.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that you have to, have lived there for, or have family ties there. But a little bit of an understanding does work. But we've got lots of people who will be based in London. They'll come up to do pieces of work up here, or they'll be based in Edinburgh, and they're maybe managing stuff right throughout Scotland. So no, you don't actually have to live in rural Scotland, especially if you've got family commitments. That can be one of the kind of barriers. But understanding the challenges of living in rural Scotland, I think is something, you can't just kind of think, well, it's fine, it's just like the city, but it's a little bit more remote.
But it's a bit smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has to be that understanding of the different challenges, different opportunities, including, right down to kind of thinking, if you're managing big infrastructure projects, there's the travel time, there's the additional delivery costs, there's all of these kind of things that have to be taken into consideration. So an understanding, yes, living in it, no, but who wouldn't want to live in rural Scotland?
Honestly, it's my husband, he is ex-artillery, and he was at the last Rural Insight Night that he gave, and he actually did say to me, he said, please say to SJ that I absolutely loved it. He now works for a bank, gone totally the other way. Which actually leads me on to, I guess, my final question for you, which would be, we kind of spoke about the heart and the soul of the veteran, and being able to look at the broader picture and the broader good for society as a whole, rather than just their own personal advancement, which I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that is exactly the attitude that service leavers and veterans can bring to any organisation, is thinking bigger than just what's happening on their desk in their department. But of course, there'll be plenty of people out there that, for reasons, have gone into a civilian career, whether it's their first job, whether it's their second or third job. It's not quite for them. But of course, there's another way, isn't there, to get involved, which could be perhaps voluntary work, that could perhaps nourish the soul, nourish that part of yourself that still wants to serve, that still wants to do something for other people. What sort of opportunities could voluntary work open up?
Again, pretty limitless, including, I have to say, if you're based in a city, because I think you kind of go on, there's a number of websites that'll talk about, volunteering opportunities. And that can be anything as simple as kind of helping at an event. So, lots of our members host massive events over the year, whether that's sort of educational, whether it's kind of festivals. They're always looking for people to kind of, who have some experience of logistics to kind of help with that. But then you've also got a number of, we're not far from Edinburgh here, but you'd be surprised how many volunteering opportunities in nature there actually are. Yeah. So in the Pentlands, peatland restoration, path restoration, helping with habitat monitoring, Pennycook Estate, again not that far from here, visitor management, rebuilding, historic environment. Most estates will require, most estates couldn't run without some degree of kind of voluntary help. Sometimes it's local, sometimes it's people kind of coming in en masse for a kind of week or two to repair all the paths. Or it's helping with some, the kind of the gardens, the designed landscapes. So again, really, really varied. And if you've got a passion for education, they're always looking for people to be involved in the kind of education programs. So last week we had members who were hosting a number of estate visits. It's only 3 or 4 weeks ago since we were involved in the Countryside Day in Kelso, where something like 1,200 P5s from across the borders all come together. Yeah. Now that takes a lot of running.
Yes.
And we know we have volunteers there, some of whom had previous careers within the military, but they're now volunteering for local agricultural shows, local agricultural associations, and directly to the rural businesses. So again, really, really varied. And if you don't have the connections, there are a couple of websites that just local, if you just type in volunteering opportunities Scotland, there's a number of opportunities, websites that's kind of pop up, and lots of our members will use those to try and reach to potential volunteers.
And I suppose when you were saying before about building a career, that having a little bit of experience or knowledge of rural Scotland is desirable. That would be a good way, if you didn't have that previous experience, if you were doing another job, I suppose that would be a good way of an entry into the sector, is building up that experience and that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it could just be, part of your recreation.
Yeah.
There's, it's so easy to access rural Scotland. Let's be honest. Even if you're in the city, you can get to it pretty quickly. Yeah. So, people shouldn't be put off applying for jobs because they've not managed to secure volunteering opportunities. We've taken people on who their only previous link with rural Scotland might have been that they did a bit of hill walking at one point. You don't have to have that. Yeah. As I say, you can. It's interesting. So at Scottish Land Estates, we often talk about the right fit. Mm-hmm. So if you look at someone's character, if you look at how they go about doing things, we can tell them how to do some of the technical stuff. But it's about someone's values. It's about how they perform the role, and that's where we found, as I say, just the real value of what an ex-military comes with. They come with those transferable core values, transferable core skills, and organisations like us can we can help with all the technical stuff. So don't be put off applying for jobs.
And I think that is such a beautiful point, because in a lot of ways, larger organisations in other sectors, they're not looking necessarily at the fit of the person. It can be a very, very clinical hiring process of, have you had the experience? Have you done the job before? No, you've not. Well, we're not after you. Whereas what you're saying is that seeing the value in the person, their character, and that they're going to have a willingness to learn.
Absolutely, and some sectors are using AI now to do
we
that
come
first,
across it all the time.
That first, and that's really disappointing, because for me it's about relationships. So going back to what we talked about the earlier, the convening role that we have, you have to have people who can develop relationships with stakeholders and with members. If you've got somebody who does not have that ability to communicate well, to bring people together, to deliver on promises that they've made, you can't develop those relationships. So I think that, again, that's where I found that some veterans have been really, really strong in terms of communication skills and a focus on getting the job done.
Yeah.
And when you're working with politicians and stakeholders and others, it's really, really important to have that kind of faith and confidence and I suppose that that you are someone who does what you said you were going to do.
Yes.
It's so important in the world in which we operate.
Listen, SJ, thank you so much for your time today, because everything that you've said, this is the sort of advocacy that's so important to us as the Officers Association Scotland, because we will always bang this drum, but to have people such as yourself and organisations such as this to put their name to it and go, hiring ex-military is just a really good idea. It really means the world to us. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Oh, well, thank you. And as I say, massive fans of the work that you guys do. But, if any business is thinking about it, don't think twice is my advice. Huge asset to the organisation.
And to all of you at home, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode with Sarah-Jane Laing. If you would like any information about the rural sector, please do get in touch with us at the Officers Association Scotland. We would be more than happy to talk to you. Also, have a look on our website for any insight events coming up. And for now, thank you so much for being on the show, and we will see you at our next event.
See you there. Thank you.